where powerful stories of betrayal, justice, and redemption come to life. Follow along as a father figure shares gripping tales filled with wisdom, emotion, and unexpected twists. Sit back and experience revenge told with calm strength and unforgettable impact.
My wife and her secretary planned my birthday party. At the restaurant, a waitress leaned in and whispered, "Act sick, do not drink anything, meet me in the back." I thought she was being dramatic until she locked the door and said, "Something is very, very wrong." 4 minutes later, 13 police cars arrived and, "I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. My name is Alan, and at 62 years old, I thought I knew my wife. After 28 years of marriage, I believed Zoe and I had settled into that comfortable rhythm that long-married couples find. We had our routines, our quiet evenings, our shared understanding of what mattered. But as I sat at my kitchen table that December morning, staring at the elaborate invitation in my hands, I realized I might not know her at all. The invitation was printed on heavy cardstock, the kind you'd use for a wedding or an important business event. Golden lettering spelled out the details of my upcoming 62nd birthday celebration, planned down to the last detail by my loving wife and her new secretary, Marcus. That should have been my first warning sign. In all our years together, Zoe had never organized anything more elaborate than a dinner reservation. She was practical, efficient, but never one for grand gestures. "Isn't it beautiful?" Zoe appeared behind me, her hand resting lightly on my shoulder. Her voice carried an excitement I hadn't heard in months, maybe years. "Marcus helped me design it. He has such an eye for these things." I looked up at her, studying the face I'd woken up next to for nearly 3 decades. Her blonde hair was freshly styled, her makeup more carefully applied than usual for a Tuesday morning. She wore the blue dress I'd bought her last Christmas, the one she'd claimed was too fancy for everyday wear. "It's very nice," I said carefully, turning the invitation over in my hands. "But don't you think this is a bit much? It's just a birthday." Something flickered across her expression, too quick to identify. "Just a birthday? Alan, you're turning 62. This is a milestone. We should celebrate." The way she said "we" made something twist in my stomach, though I couldn't say why. Marcus had been working as Zoe's personal secretary for 9 months now, helping her manage what she called her projects. I'd never been entirely clear on what these projects were, but they seemed to require a lot of meetings, phone calls, and late evenings at the office space she'd rented downtown. Marcus was 28, tall and lean with dark hair and an easy smile that never quite reached his eyes. Zoe had hired him after meeting him at some networking event, claiming she needed help organizing her volunteer work and social commitments. At the time, I'd been pleased. Zoe had seemed restless lately, and I thought having something to focus on would be good for her. Now, looking at this invitation with its precise formatting and expensive paper, I wondered if I'd been naive. "Where exactly are we having this celebration?" I asked, scanning the details again. "Bella Court, that Italian place on 5th Street. Marcus suggested it. He knows the manager, got us a private dining room." She moved around the kitchen as she spoke, unnecessarily rearranging items that were already in their proper places. Her movements seemed nervous, agitated. Bella Court was upscale, expensive, the kind of place that would cost several $100s for a private party. That must be costing a fortune. Maybe we should just do something at home, invite a few friends over. "No." The word came out sharper than necessary, and she immediately softened her tone. "I mean, it's all arranged already. Marcus has taken care of everything. The deposits are paid, the menu is set. It would be complicated to change now." I nodded, but something cold was settling in my chest. In 28 years of marriage, Zoe had never made major financial decisions without discussing them with me first. Our retirement account had $2,400,000 in it, money I'd saved carefully over decades of work as an insurance adjuster. We were comfortable, but we'd always been cautious with spending. "How much is this costing us?" I asked. Zoe's hand stilled on the coffee mug she'd been washing. Does it matter? It's your birthday, Alan. You've worked hard your whole life. Don't you think you deserve something special? The deflection bothered me more than I wanted to admit. I'd just like to know. Marcus is handling the financial arrangements. He got us a good deal through his connections. She turned to face me, her smile bright and artificial. Just focus on enjoying yourself. That's all I want. The way she said Marcus's name with a softness I hadn't heard her use in years made my throat tighten. I watched her carefully as she moved around the kitchen, noting details I might have missed before. Her phone, which used to stay on the counter, was now always in her purse or pocket. She'd started working late 3 nights a week, something she'd never done in all the years I'd known her. And there were small changes in her appearance, new clothes, a different perfume, a lightness to her step that I couldn't remember seeing since we were young. "Who's coming to this party?" I asked. "Oh, you know, friends, some people from the neighborhood." Her answer was vague, dismissive. "Marcus is handling the guest list too. He's so organized, Alan. I don't know what I'd do without him." There it was again, that tone when she mentioned his name. My hands tightened around the invitation until the expensive paper crinkled slightly at the edges. "I'd like to see the guest list," I said. Zoe turned back to the sink, her shoulders tense. "Why, don't you trust me to invite the right people?" "It's not about trust. I just want to know who's coming to my own birthday party." "Marcus has it on his computer. I'll ask him to send it to you." But even as she said it, I could tell she had no intention of following through. I stood up, walking to the window that looked out over our backyard. The garden Zoe used to tend so carefully was overgrown now, neglected since Marcus had entered our lives. Another change I should have noticed sooner. "Zoe," I said carefully, "is everything okay? Between us, I mean?" She joined me at the window, slipping her arm through mine in a gesture that should have felt natural but somehow didn't. "Of course everything's okay. Why would you ask that?" "You've seemed different lately. Distant." "I'm just busy with my projects. Marcus keeps me organized, helps me stay on top of things. It's been good for me having something to focus on." The way she said his name again made me close my eyes briefly. When I opened them, I caught her reflection in the window glass. She was smiling, but it wasn't directed at me. She was looking at her phone, which had buzzed with a text message. "Marcus?" I asked, just confirming some details for Saturday night. She tucked the phone away quickly, but not before I saw the contact name on the screen. It wasn't listed as Marcus or Marcus, secretary. It was saved simply as M with a heart emoji. My chest tightened and I had to focus on breathing normally. 28 years of marriage and my wife was putting heart emojis next to another man's contact information. "The party starts at 7, she said, seemingly oblivious to my discovery. "Cocktail hour first, then dinner. Marcus suggested we do a signature cocktail, something special just for you." "A signature cocktail?" "Yes, he knows about mixology, too. Apparently he worked as a bartender during college. He's going to create something unique for your birthday." Her enthusiasm felt forced, rehearsed. I turned away from the window, studying my wife's face. After nearly 3 decades together, I should have been able to read her expressions easily, but looking at her now, I realized I didn't recognize the woman standing in front of me. The excitement in her eyes wasn't about my birthday. It was about something else entirely. "That sounds thoughtful," I managed to say. "It will be perfect," she said, and for the first time all morning her smile seemed genuine. Just perfect. As she left the kitchen, humming softly to herself, I remained by the window. The invitation lay on the table behind me, its golden letters promising a celebration. But all I could think about was the heart emoji next to Marcus's name and the way my wife's face had lit up when she talked about a signature cocktail made specially for me. Something was wrong. After 62 years of life and 28 years of marriage, I'd learned to trust my instincts. And right now, every instinct I had was screaming that this birthday party wasn't about celebrating me at all. I picked up the invitation again, reading it more carefully. The date, the time, the location, all specified in that elegant script. But what bothered me most was what wasn't mentioned anywhere on the expensive cardstock. There was no RSVP information, no contact details, nothing that suggested other people would actually be attending. It looked less like an invitation to a party and more like a formal announcement of an event that only 3 people would attend: Zoe, Marcus, and me. The realization hit me like ice water. Whatever was happening Saturday night at Bellecourt, it wasn't going to be a birthday celebration. It was going to be something else entirely. And as I stood in my kitchen, holding that beautiful invitation, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being invited to my own funeral. Saturday evening arrived with an unseasonable warmth for December. I dressed carefully in the navy suit Zoe had laid out for me, the one she claimed brought out my eyes. As I adjusted my tie in the bathroom mirror, I caught sight of her reflection behind me. She was applying lipstick with unusual precision, her hands steady despite what should have been party planning nerves. "You look handsome," she said, meeting my eyes in the mirror. "Very distinguished." "Thank you." I turned to face her. "You look beautiful too." And she did. Zoe had chosen a black dress I'd never seen before, something sleek and expensive looking. Her jewelry was more elaborate than usual, and she'd had her hair done at the salon that afternoon. She looked like she was dressing for something important, something that mattered to her deeply. The drive to Bellecourt took 15 minutes through quiet Saturday evening streets. Zoe chattered nervously about the weather, the traffic, anything except the party we were supposedly heading to. I found myself studying her profile as she spoke, noting the way she kept checking her phone at red lights. "Are you expecting to hear from someone?" I asked after the 4th time. "Just Marcus. He wanted to make sure everything was set up properly before we arrived." She tucked the phone into her purse with deliberate finality. "He's very thorough about details." Bellecourt sat on a corner lot, its warm golden light spilling onto the sidewalk through large windows. From the outside it looked busy, filled with couples and families enjoying their Saturday night dinners. The valet took our car, and as we walked toward the entrance, I noticed Marcus's silver BMW already parked in the lot. "Marcus is here early," I observed. "He wanted to coordinate with the staff, make sure the private room was ready." Zoe's voice carried that same excitement I'd heard all week when she talked about the party arrangements. The hostess at Bellecourt greeted us with professional warmth. "Mr. and Mrs. Morrison, right this way, please. Your private dining room is ready." As we followed her through the restaurant, I looked around for other guests I might recognize. The dining room buzzed with conversation and laughter, but no one looked up or waved. No one seemed to be heading in our direction or looking for a birthday party to join. The private room was smaller than I'd expected, intimate in a way that felt more appropriate for a business meeting than a birthday celebration. A single round table was set for 3 people, elegant place settings with crystal glasses and cloth napkins. Marcus stood near the windows, adjusting some flowers on a side table. He turned when we entered, his face lighting up with that practiced smile. "Alan, happy birthday." He crossed the room with quick strides, extending his hand. His grip was firm, confident, the handshake of someone who was comfortable taking control of situations. "Thank you, Marcus. This looks lovely. Zoe wanted everything to be perfect for you." The way he said her name with casual familiarity made something tighten in my stomach. "I hope you'll be pleased with what we've arranged." I looked around the room again. 3 place settings. No other guests. No presents on a gift table. No decorations beyond the flowers Marcus had been adjusting. "Are we waiting for other people to arrive?" I asked. Zoe and Marcus exchanged a quick glance, so brief I almost missed it. "The others will be along shortly," Zoe said. "You know how people are with timing." But even as she spoke, I could see she was lying. There were no other guests coming. Whatever this was, it was meant to be just the 3 of us. Marcus gestured toward the table. "Why don't we get started with cocktails? I've prepared something special for the birthday boy." On a small cart near the table sat an array of bottles, mixers, and garnishes. Marcus moved behind it with practiced ease, his hands confident as he began combining ingredients. I watched him work, noting the precision of his movements, the way he measured each component exactly. "What are you making?" I asked. "A Morrison special," he said with a grin. Named in your honor. It's a variation on a Manhattan, but with some unique elements. Premium bourbon, a special vermouth blend, and a few secret ingredients that make it completely one of a kind. He held up a small, dark bottle as he spoke, something I didn't recognize. The liquid inside was almost black, syrupy. He added just a few drops to the mixture, then stirred it with deliberate precision. "What's in that bottle?" I asked. "Trade secret," Marcus said with a laugh. "Every mixologist has his special touches. This is mine." Zoe moved to stand beside Marcus, close enough that their arms brushed. Marcus worked in some very upscale bars during college. He knows how to create drinks that are absolutely memorable. The way she emphasized memorable made my skin crawl. Marcus strained the cocktail into a crystal glass, added a garnish, and presented it to me with a flourish. "Happy birthday, Alan. May this be a night you'll never forget." I took the glass, noting its unusual color. Most Manhattans were amber or dark brown, but this one had an almost purple tint. The smell was off too, medicinal underneath the familiar bourbon and vermouth. "Aren't you two having one?" I asked, noticing that Marcus had only prepared a single cocktail. "We thought we'd have wine with dinner," Zoe said quickly. "This is special just for you." Marcus nodded, opening a bottle of red wine and pouring 2 glasses. "We wanted you to have something unique, something that celebrated you specifically." I held the cocktail glass, feeling its weight. Everything about this moment felt wrong. The empty room, the single special drink, the way Zoe and Marcus kept watching me with barely concealed anticipation. "Go ahead," Marcus urged. "Try it. I'm very curious to get your feedback." Something in his tone made me look up sharply. There was an eagerness there that went beyond professional pride in his mixology skills. He wanted me to drink this cocktail badly, and I couldn't understand why. "Actually, could I use the restroom first?" I said. "Too much coffee this afternoon." "Of course," Marcus said, though I caught a flicker of impatience in his expression. "Right through that door." I set the glass down on the table and headed toward the restroom, but as I reached the door, I heard Zoe's voice behind me. "When he comes back, make sure he finishes the whole thing," she said quietly. "You said it needs to be the full dose to be effective." My blood turned to ice. I stood frozen with my hand on the door handle, straining to hear more. "Don't worry," Marcus replied, his voice equally low. "Once he drinks it, he'll start feeling dizzy within 10 minutes. We'll call 911, say he's having chest pains. At his age, with his family history, nobody will question a heart attack." "And you're sure it will look natural?" "Completely. The compound is undetectable in standard toxicology screens. By the time anyone thinks to run more sophisticated tests, if they ever do, it'll be too late to matter." I pressed my back against the wall, my heart pounding so hard I was afraid they'd hear it. They were talking about killing me. My wife and her lover were planning to poison me and make it look like a natural heart attack. "What about the life insurance?" Zoe's voice was barely a whisper. $800,000 payable to you as beneficiary, plus all his retirement savings, the house, everything will be set for life. "And after a respectable mourning period?" "We can be together openly. No more sneaking around, no more pretending. Just you and me and all of Alan's money." I closed my eyes, feeling sick. Not just because they wanted to kill me, but because of how casual they sounded discussing it. How long had they been planning this? How long had my wife been looking at me and seeing nothing but a bank account to be liquidated? The restroom door opened with a soft creak, and I slipped inside, my hands shaking as I locked it behind me. I leaned against the sink, staring at my reflection in the mirror. 62 years old, gray hair, lines around my eyes from decades of smiling. I looked like exactly what I was, a trusting older man who'd never imagined his wife would want him dead. But I wasn't going to make it easy for them. I pulled out my phone and quickly typed a text message, then hit send. If Marcus and Zoe thought they were going to poison me and collect my life insurance, they had seriously underestimated who they were dealing with. When I returned to the dining room, they both looked up expectantly. Marcus gestured toward my untouched cocktail. "Everything all right? Your drink is getting warm." Just fine, I said, picking up the glass. Sorry to keep you waiting. I raised the cocktail toward my lips, watching their faces carefully. Zoe leaned forward slightly, her eyes bright with anticipation. Marcus stood perfectly still, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. Just as the glass reached my lips, there was a gentle knock on the door. A young woman peered in, wearing the black pants and white shirt of the restaurant staff. "Excuse me," she said, her voice urgent but quiet. "Sir, could I speak with you for a moment? There's been a small issue with your credit card." Marcus frowned. "Can't this wait? We're in the middle of a private celebration." The waitress met my eyes directly. "I'm afraid it's urgent, sir. If you could just step outside for one moment." Something in her expression made me stand up immediately. "Of course," I said, setting down the untouched cocktail. "I'll be right back." As I followed her out of the room, I heard Zoe call after me. "Don't be long, darling. Your drink will get cold." The waitress led me down a short hallway to a service area. Once we were alone, she turned to face me, her expression deadly serious. "My name is Sarah," she said quietly, "and I need you to listen to me very carefully. Do not go back in there. Do not drink that cocktail. And whatever you do, do not let them know that you know." I stared at her, my heart racing. "How do you—" "There's no time to explain everything," she interrupted. "But I overheard them talking while I was setting up the room earlier. They're planning to hurt you. That drink has something in it, something that will make you very sick." The relief that flooded through me was so intense I had to grip the wall for support. I wasn't going crazy. I wasn't paranoid. Someone else had seen through their plan. "What do I do?" I asked. Sarah glanced around nervously. "Act like everything is normal. Go back in there, pretend to drink, but don't actually swallow anything. I've already called for help." "Called who?" "People who can stop this," she said cryptically. "Just trust me, and whatever happens in the next few minutes, stay calm." As she spoke, I heard the distant sound of sirens approaching. Sarah's expression grew determined. "It's time," she said. "Remember, act normal, but don't drink anything. Help is on the way." I walked back into the private dining room on unsteady legs, my mind reeling from Sarah's warning. The scene looked exactly as I'd left it. Zoe sitting elegantly at the table, Marcus standing near the window with his wine glass, both of them wearing expressions of patient concern. "Everything sorted out?" Marcus asked, his voice carrying just the right note of polite interest. "Yes, just a minor authorization issue." I picked up my cocktail glass, noting how their eyes immediately focused on my hands. "Sorry for the interruption." "No problem at all," Zoe said, her smile bright and encouraging. "These things happen. The important thing is we're all here together now." I raised the glass toward my lips again, watching their faces. Zoe's breathing had quickened almost imperceptibly. Marcus had set down his wine and was watching me with the intensity of a predator watching prey. The sirens were getting closer now, though they didn't seem to notice yet. I pretended to take a sip, letting the liquid touch my lips, but not allowing any into my mouth. The smell was worse up close, medicinal and bitter underneath the bourbon. "How is it?" Marcus asked eagerly. "Interesting," I said carefully. "Very unique flavor profile." "I told you Marcus was talented," Zoe said, but there was a tension in her voice now. "Drink up, darling. Don't let it get warm." The endearment felt like acid in my ears. How long had she been calling me darling while planning my death? How many nights had she lain beside me in bed, thinking about my life insurance policy instead of our life together? "Marcus," I said, setting the glass down again, "tell me about your background. Zoe mentioned you worked in high-end bars during college." A flicker of annoyance crossed his features. "We can talk about that later. Your birthday drink is getting diluted." "I'm curious, though, which bars? I used to travel quite a bit for work. Might have been to some of them." Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "Various places. Nothing you'd know." The sirens were much louder now, and Zoe finally noticed them. She turned toward the window, frowning. "That's odd. Sounds like they're coming this way." Probably an accident on 5th Street, Marcus said dismissively, but I could see sweat beginning to form on his forehead. Alan, really, you should finish your cocktail before we order dinner. I picked up the glass one more time, and as I did, the door to the dining room burst open. Sarah entered first, followed by 3 police officers and a woman in a business suit who had the unmistakable bearing of a detective. "Nobody move," the detective said calmly, her voice carrying absolute authority. "Mr. Morrison, please step away from that glass." The effect on Marcus and Zoe was immediate and devastating. Marcus went completely white, his wine glass slipping from his fingers to shatter on the floor. Zoe made a small, choking sound, her hand flying to her throat. "What's going on?" she managed to say, but her voice was strangled, guilty. The detective moved to the table and carefully picked up my cocktail glass with a napkin. "This drink is evidence in an attempted murder case." "Murder?" Zoe's voice climbed to a near shriek. "That's ridiculous. This is my husband's birthday party." One of the officers was already moving toward Marcus, who seemed frozen in place. "Sir, I need you to put your hands where I can see them." "This is insane," Marcus said, but his voice cracked on the words. "We haven't done anything wrong." The detective looked at him with cold professionalism. "Mr. Marcus Delacroix, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder and attempted murder in the 1st degree." "Delacroix?" I stared at Marcus in shock. "I thought your last name was Rains." "One of many aliases," the detective said grimly as the officer cuffed Marcus. "His real name is Marcus Delacroix, and he's wanted in connection with similar cases in 3 other states." The words hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't just about my wife having an affair. This was something much worse, much more calculated. "Mrs. Morrison," the detective continued, turning to Zoe, "you're also under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder." "No!" Zoe lunged toward me, her face desperate. "Alan, tell them this is crazy. Tell them we're just having a birthday dinner." I looked at my wife, this woman I'd shared my life with for 28 years, and felt like I was seeing a stranger. "Zoe, they heard you talking. They heard you planning to kill me." Her face crumpled, but not with remorse, with the rage of someone whose carefully laid plan had been ruined. "You don't understand," she hissed. "You're old, Alan. You're boring. You've been boring for years. Marcus and we're alive. We have passion. We deserve better than this mediocre existence." The words cut deeper than I'd expected. "So you decided to kill me for the insurance money?" $800,000, Marcus said bitterly as the officer led him toward the door. "Plus your retirement savings. We could have had a real life together." "What you would have had," the detective interrupted, "was murder charges. The compound you put in that cocktail would have caused cardiac arrest within minutes. It would have looked natural to a cursory examination, but we've seen this exact method before." I felt sick. "Before?" The detective nodded grimly. "Mr. Delacroix has been running this operation for 5 years. He targets older men with substantial assets, seduces their wives, and convinces them to help murder their husbands for the inheritance." "How many?" I whispered. "You would have been number 7. The room seemed to spin around me. 7 men, 7 marriages destroyed, 7 families devastated by this man's greed and my wife's willingness to betray everything we'd built together. "Alan," Zoe said, desperately as the second officer moved to arrest her, "you have to understand. I never meant for it to go this far. Marcus said it would be quick, painless, you wouldn't suffer." "You were going to watch me die," I said quietly. "You were going to hold my hand while I had what looked like a heart attack, and you were going to let me die believing you loved me." Tears were streaming down her face now, but they looked fake, calculated. "I did love you. I do love you. This isn't about love." "No," I agreed. "It's about $800,000 and a retirement account worth $2,400,000. The detective looked up sharply. $2,400,000? That's significantly more than we were told. Marcus, who had been silent since his arrest, suddenly spoke up. "What? Zoe, you said it was maybe $500,000 total." For the first time since the police had arrived, Zoe looked genuinely panicked. I didn't know the exact amount. You lying bitch, Marcus snarled. You were planning to cut me out of most of it, weren't you? The detective watched this exchange with professional interest. Thieves falling out always happens eventually. As they led Marcus away, he turned back to Zoe with pure hatred in his eyes. I hope you rot in prison. You're as cold-blooded as they come. Zoe looked at me one last time as the officer guided her toward the door. Alan, please. I know I made mistakes, but we can work this out. 28 years of marriage has to count for something. I stood there in the wreckage of what had been my birthday celebration, surrounded by broken glass and the remains of my shattered trust. 28 years, I repeated slowly. 28 years of me believing you loved me. 28 years of me working to build a future for us, and you threw it all away for money and a man who was using you just as much as you were using me. That's not true, she whispered. Isn't it? I looked at her steadily. How long, Zoe? How long were you planning this? She didn't answer, but the detective did. Based on our investigation, they've been planning this for approximately 6 months. The relationship between your wife and Mr. Delacroix began shortly after he was hired as her secretary. 6 months. Half a year of living with a woman who was actively planning my murder. Half a year of good morning kisses and good night wishes from someone who saw me as nothing more than an obstacle to be removed. After they took Zoe away, I found myself alone in the dining room with Sarah and the detective. The silence was heavy, broken only by the distant sounds of the restaurant continuing its normal Saturday night service. Mr. Morrison, the detective said gently, I'm Detective Rodriguez. I know this has been traumatic, but I need to ask you some questions about your wife's recent behavior. I nodded numbly, sinking into one of the chairs. Sarah, I said, looking at the young woman who had saved my life. How did you know? Sarah sat down across from me, her expression serious. I'm a registered nurse. I work here part-time to help pay off student loans from nursing school. When I was setting up this room earlier, I overheard them discussing the plan, the symptoms they described, the timeline they mentioned. It all matched with certain types of poisoning I'd studied. So you called the police? I called Detective Rodriguez specifically. My supervisor at the hospital had briefed us about this type of case after 2 suspicious deaths at other medical facilities in the area. Detective Rodriguez nodded. We've been tracking Mr. Delacroix for 8 months, but he's careful. He never uses the same method twice in the same city, and he always makes sure the deaths look natural. This is the first time we've been able to catch him in the act. I stared down at my hands, still shaking slightly. What happens now? Now you go home, and you try to rebuild your life, Detective Rodriguez said kindly. And Mr. Delacroix and your wife go to prison for a very long time. As I sat there in that elegant private dining room, surrounded by the remnants of what should have been a birthday celebration, I realized something profound had changed inside me. For 28 years, I had defined myself as half of a couple, as Zoe's husband, as part of a partnership I thought was built on love and mutual respect. But that partnership had been an illusion. While I was working to secure our future, Zoe was planning to end mine. While I was saving money for our retirement years together, she was calculating how much my death would be worth to her. The man who walked into Bellecourt that evening had been trusting, devoted, perhaps naive. The man who would walk out was someone different entirely. Someone who understood that the most dangerous predators are often the ones who share your bed, who know your routines, who have access to your vulnerabilities. As Sarah helped me gather my coat and Detective Rodriguez finished collecting evidence, I caught sight of my reflection in the restaurant's dark window. I looked older somehow, but not weaker. There was something in my eyes that hadn't been there before, a hardness born of betrayal, but also a clarity I'd been lacking. Tomorrow I would have to face the reality of my new life. Tomorrow I would have to figure out how to exist without the woman I'd thought was my partner, my companion, my friend, but tonight I was alive. And for the first time in months I was finally seeing clearly. 3 days after my birthday dinner that became an arrest scene, I sat in Detective Rodriguez's office, staring at a thick manila folder that contained the truth about the man my wife had been willing to kill for. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows across documents that detailed a life built entirely on deception and murder. "Are you sure you want to see all of this?" Detective Rodriguez asked gently. She'd been kind to me throughout this nightmare, understanding that having your entire life shattered requires a certain delicate handling. "I need to know," I said, though my voice came out hoarse. "I need to understand what she chose over 28 years of marriage." The detective opened the folder, revealing photographs, police reports, and financial documents. The first photo showed Marcus as I knew him, confident and smiling. The second showed the same face with different hair, different clothing, under a different name. Marcus Delacroix is 31 years old, not 28 as he told your wife. He's originally from Louisiana, though he's used addresses in 7 different states over the past decade. I studied the photographs, seeing how easily he'd transformed himself. The charming smile was consistent, but everything else about his appearance could change. Hair color, style of dress, even his posture seemed different in each image. His real background? College dropout, spent 2 years in prison for fraud when he was 23. That's where he met Vincent Carrera, an older inmate who taught him the finer points of what they call inheritance acceleration. The euphemism made my stomach turn. "You mean murdering people for their money?" Exactly. Carrera had been running this type of operation for years before he got caught. He taught Marcus that targeting older men through their wives was the safest approach. Less suspicion, easier to make deaths look natural, and the wife becomes both accomplice and cover story. Detective Rodriguez pulled out a timeline, marked with dates and locations. After his release from prison, Marcus spent 6 months practicing his approach on wealthy widows in small towns, perfecting his persona. Then he moved to larger cities and began the husband targeting operation. How many wives has he done this with? 8 that we know of. Your wife was number 8. I felt like I'd been punched. 8 women willing to murder their husbands? "It's more complicated than that," the detective said carefully. "Marcus is extremely skilled at psychological manipulation. He doesn't approach women and immediately suggest murder. He spends months, sometimes over a year, gradually isolating them from their support systems and building dependency." She pulled out a psychological profile, dense with clinical language that somehow made Marcus's crimes feel even more calculating. He targets women in long-term marriages who feel unappreciated or neglected. He presents himself as successful, attentive, everything their husbands supposedly aren't. He makes them feel young and desirable again. And then he gradually introduces financial stress. He'll mention business opportunities that require investment or expensive lifestyle changes that their current income can't support. He makes the woman believe that her husband is the only thing standing between her and the life she deserves. I thought about Zoe's behavior over the past year. The new clothes, the salon visits, the general air of someone living beyond our means. He was training her to want more than we could afford. Exactly. And when the woman becomes frustrated with the limitations of her current life, Marcus introduces the idea that her husband's death would solve all their problems. Not immediately, of course. He plants seeds, lets the idea grow. Detective Rodriguez showed me transcripts of recorded conversations between Marcus and other wives he'd targeted. Reading them was like seeing a blueprint for the destruction of my marriage. "Look at this pattern," she said, pointing to highlighted sections. First, he builds intimacy by sharing fictional personal tragedies, lost parents, failed businesses, health scares that made him realize how short life is. I recognized the stories immediately. Zoe had repeated them to me, explaining why she felt so sorry for Marcus, why he needed our help and support. Then he begins criticizing the husband indirectly. "You deserve so much more than this. A woman like you should be traveling, experiencing life. If something happened to me tomorrow, I'd want you to be financially secure." He told Zoe those exact things, I whispered. The final phase is presenting the murder as an act of love. Your husband is old, probably doesn't have many good years left anyway. We'd be putting him out of his misery. He'd want you to be happy even if he's gone. I had to stand up and walk to the window looking out at the city street below. Normal people going about their normal lives, unaware that predators like Marcus moved among them, targeting the foundations of families and marriages. What about the other wives? What happened to them? That's the truly disturbing part, Detective Rodriguez said quietly. 3 of them are in prison for murder. 2 committed suicide after Marcus abandoned them following the deaths of their husbands. 1 disappeared entirely, and we suspect Marcus killed her when she became a liability. I turned back to face her. And the other 2? 1 is in a psychiatric facility. The psychological trauma of what she'd done, combined with Marcus's abandonment, caused a complete breakdown. The 8th wife was actually the one who led us to Marcus. She pulled out another file, this one containing the testimony of a woman named Patricia Holmes. Patricia's husband was targeted last year in Phoenix, but unlike the others, Patricia got cold feet at the last minute and called the police herself. She turned him in? She realized that Marcus had been lying to her about everything, his background, his feelings for her, even his name. When she confronted him, he became violent and threatened to kill her if she exposed him. I sat back down, feeling overwhelmed by the scope of Marcus's operations. This wasn't a crime of passion or even simple greed. It was a business carefully planned and methodically executed. How did he find Zoe? Detective Rodriguez pulled out surveillance photos showing Marcus at various social events, charity functions, and networking meetings. He researches potential targets extensively. He looks for women married to men with substantial assets, particularly those who seem isolated or unhappy. 1 photo showed Marcus at a charity auction, the same event where Zoe had met him. In the background, I could see my wife laughing at something he was saying, completely unaware that she was being evaluated as a potential accomplice to murder. He spent 3 months observing your wife before approaching her. He knew about your retirement savings, your life insurance, even your daily routines before he ever introduced himself. How could he know all that? Public records, social media, even something as simple as following your wife's car to learn your patterns. Marcus is extremely thorough in his preparation. The detective showed me Marcus's notebook, recovered from his apartment after his arrest, pages and pages of notes about my life, my marriage, my vulnerabilities. He documented every detail of our relationship, looking for weaknesses he could exploit. Look at this entry, she said, pointing to a page dated 6 months ago. Subject appears devoted to wife but takes her for granted. Wife seems restless, mentions feeling invisible, opportunity for intervention. Reading his clinical assessment of my marriage felt like being dissected while still alive. He'd identified the small fractures in our relationship, the tiny disappointments that accumulate over decades, and turned them into weapons. There's more, Detective Rodriguez said grimly. We found detailed plans for after your death. Marcus had no intention of staying with your wife long term. She showed me documents outlining how Marcus planned to gradually steal Zoe's newfound wealth and disappear, leaving her with nothing but the knowledge that she'd murdered her husband for a man who never cared about her at all. He was going to abandon her? Within 6 months of collecting your life insurance, he'd already established a false identity and bank accounts in another state. Your wife would have been left alone, broke, and guilty of murder. The irony was devastating. Zoe had destroyed our marriage and planned my death for a man who saw her as nothing more than a temporary tool. She'd given up everything real for something that was entirely fake. Where is Zoe now? County jail. She's been placed in protective custody because Marcus still has connections that could pose a threat to witnesses. Has she said anything about why she did it? Detective Rodriguez hesitated. She's been asking to see you. Her lawyer says she wants to explain herself, to apologize. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Apologize for planning to murder me? Mr. Morrison, I have to ask, do you want to see her? It might give you some closure, some answers. I considered it for a long moment. Part of me did want answers. I wanted to understand how the woman I'd shared my bed with for 28 years could look at me and see only a bank account to be liquidated. I wanted to know if there had been any real love in our marriage, or if I'd been living with a stranger all along. But mostly I wanted to move forward. I wanted to reclaim my life from the wreckage Marcus had made of it. "No," I said finally. "Whatever Zoe has to say, I don't need to hear it. She made her choice when she decided to poison me for money." Detective Rodriguez nodded approvingly. "That's probably wise. In my experience, these conversations rarely provide the closure people hope for." As I prepared to leave her office, she handed me one final document. Marcus's full confession. He gave up everything once he realized Zoe had lied about the amount of money involved. He's facing multiple murder charges in several states, but he wanted to make sure she didn't get a reduced sentence. I took the confession, but didn't open it. I'd learned enough about Marcus Delacroix to understand what my wife had chosen over our marriage. She'd chosen a fantasy, a carefully constructed lie designed to separate her from her conscience and me from my life. Walking out of the police station that afternoon, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: clarity. For the first time since this nightmare began, I understood exactly what I was dealing with. Not a marriage that had failed, not a wife who had fallen out of love, but a targeted attack by a professional predator who had turned my own spouse into a weapon against me. The knowledge was devastating, but it was also liberating. I hadn't failed as a husband. I hadn't driven Zoe away through neglect or indifference. I had simply been unlucky enough to be married to a woman vulnerable to Marcus's particular brand of manipulation. That evening, I sat in my kitchen, the same room where I'd first noticed the heart emoji next to Marcus's name in Zoe's phone. The house felt different now, not because she was gone, but because I finally understood who she really was. Tomorrow, I would begin the process of rebuilding my life. But tonight, I was grateful for one simple, profound truth. I was alive, and the people who had wanted me dead were in prison where they belonged. 2 weeks after learning the full truth about Marcus and his operation, I found myself standing in the courthouse hallway waiting to testify at Zoe's bail hearing. The marble floors echoed with footsteps and hushed conversations as lawyers moved between courtrooms, their clients trailing behind with expressions ranging from defiant to devastated. I hadn't seen my wife since the night of her arrest. Through her lawyer, she'd made multiple requests to meet with me, all of which I'd declined. But today I would have to face her in court, to tell a judge why I believed she should remain in custody until her trial. "Mr. Morrison?" A young woman approached me, carrying a briefcase and wearing the confident expression of someone accustomed to difficult cases. "I'm Amanda Chen, the prosecutor assigned to your case." We shook hands, and she gestured toward a quiet corner where we could speak privately. "How are you holding up?" she asked, her tone genuinely concerned. "As well as can be expected, I suppose. It's still difficult to believe this is really happening." "I understand. I've reviewed all the evidence, and I want you to know we have a very strong case. Mr. Delacroix's confession implicated your wife in significant detail." She pulled out a legal pad covered with notes. "There's something else you should know before we go in there. We've discovered additional information about your wife's financial activities over the past year." My stomach tightened. "What kind of activities?" "She's been systematically moving money from your joint accounts into accounts that only she could access. Small amounts over time, nothing that would trigger automatic alerts, but it adds up to approximately $73,000. I felt like I'd been hit by a truck. $73,000. Over how long a period? 8 months. She started moving money shortly after Marcus was hired as her secretary. Amanda's expression was grim. "We believe Marcus was coaching her on how to gradually separate your assets so that when you died, she'd have immediate access to funds without waiting for probate." The betrayal felt fresh all over again. Not only had Zoe been planning to kill me, but she'd been stealing from me for months. Every morning kiss, every evening dinner together, every conversation about our plans and dreams had been happening while she systematically looted our savings. "There's more," Amanda continued. "We found evidence that she forged your signature on a life insurance policy increase 6 months ago." Your policy was originally for $400,000. She increased it to $800,000 without your knowledge. How is that possible? Wouldn't they need my medical records, my consent? Marcus had connections with someone at the insurance company. For a fee, they processed the paperwork without requiring your physical signature. The monthly premiums were automatically deducted from your joint account. I had to sit down on one of the wooden benches that lined the hallway. For months, I'd been paying higher premiums on a policy that would pay double to the woman who was planning to murder me. Mr. Morrison, I know this is overwhelming, but there's something else we discovered that you need to know. I looked up at her, wondering what other devastation was coming. Your wife had already begun the process of legally changing her name back to her maiden name. The paperwork was filed 3 weeks before your birthday dinner. The implications hit me immediately. She was preparing to disappear after I died. It appears so. She also had applications for new credit cards and a lease agreement for an apartment across town, all under her maiden name. She was setting up an entirely new life. As Amanda spoke, I caught sight of Zoe being led into the courtroom by her attorney. Even from a distance, I could see that jail had changed her. Her blonde hair was pulled back severely, her face was pale, and she wore the orange jumpsuit that marked her as an inmate. But what struck me most was her posture. She no longer carried herself with the confidence of a woman who controlled her environment. She looked small, diminished. "Are you ready to face her?" Amanda asked gently. "As ready as I'll ever be." The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, with wooden benches that reminded me of a church. I took a seat behind the prosecution table, close enough to hear every word but far enough away to maintain some emotional distance. When Zoe's case was called, she stood beside her attorney, a middle-aged man who had the weary look of someone who specialized in hopeless causes. She turned slightly, scanning the courtroom until her eyes found mine. The moment our gazes met, her composure cracked. Tears immediately began streaming down her face, and she mouthed the word "sorry" repeatedly. But I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, no forgiveness, just a cold detachment that surprised me. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s, reviewed the case file before speaking. "Mrs. Morrison, you're charged with conspiracy to commit murder in the first degree and attempted murder. The prosecution is requesting that bail be denied. How do you plead?" Zoe's voice was barely audible. "Not guilty, Your Honor." Amanda stood to present the prosecution's argument. "Your Honor, the defendant participated in a carefully planned attempt to murder her husband of 28 years for financial gain. She conspired with a known criminal, Marcus Delacroix, who has confessed to multiple similar crimes in other states." As Amanda detailed the evidence, I watched Zoe's face. She kept glancing at me as if hoping to see some sign of the love that had once existed between us. But that man was gone, poisoned as surely as Marcus had tried to poison my body. "Furthermore," Amanda continued, "the defendant has demonstrated a pattern of deception and financial manipulation. She stole approximately $73,000 from joint accounts, forged her husband's signature on insurance documents, and was actively preparing to assume a new identity after his death." Zoe's attorney stood to respond. "Your Honor, my client is a 68-year-old woman with no prior criminal record. She was manipulated by a professional con artist who targeted vulnerable women. She poses no flight risk and has strong ties to the community." I almost laughed at the irony. Strong ties to the community? She'd been planning to disappear the moment I was dead. The judge turned to me. "Mr. Morrison, would you like to make a statement?" I stood slowly, feeling the weight of 28 years of marriage pressing down on my shoulders. When I spoke, my voice was steady, clear. "Your Honor, I trusted this woman completely. I shared my home, my dreams, my financial security with her because I believed we were partners. I believed she loved me." Zoe was crying openly now, her shoulders shaking. Instead, I discovered that she saw me as nothing more than an obstacle to be removed. She wasn't just planning to kill me, she was planning to watch me die believing she loved me. She was going to hold my hand while I had what appeared to be a heart attack, and she was going to let me die thinking she was grieving. I paused, looking directly at Zoe for the first time since entering the courtroom. That level of calculated cruelty, that willingness to betray everything we built together, that makes her dangerous, not just to me but to anyone who stands between her and what she wants. The judge nodded thoughtfully. Mr. Morrison, do you believe your wife would attempt to contact you or retaliate if released on bail? I believe my wife is capable of anything when properly motivated. 8 months ago, I would have trusted her with my life. Now I know she was literally planning to take it. After brief deliberation, the judge denied bail. The court finds that the defendant poses a significant risk to public safety and to the victim specifically. The calculated nature of this crime and the defendant's demonstrated willingness to engage in deception and manipulation make her unsuitable for release. As the bailiff led Zoe away, she turned back one final time. "Alan," she called out, her voice breaking, "please, I know I made mistakes, but I love you. I've always loved you." I remained seated, watching her disappear through the door that led back to the holding cells. The words that should have meant everything meant nothing now. Love didn't plan murder. Love didn't steal and lie and manipulate. What Zoe felt for me might have been many things, but it wasn't love. Outside the courthouse, Amanda walked with me to my car. "How do you feel about how that went?" "Relieved," I said honestly. I was afraid I might feel sorry for her, might start doubting myself. But seeing her today, hearing her lawyer try to paint her as a victim, it just reinforced that I never really knew who she was. "The trial will be more difficult," Amanda warned. "Her attorney will try to portray Marcus as the mastermind and your wife as his victim. They'll argue that she was psychologically manipulated, that she wasn't responsible for her actions." I nodded. "I understand. But the evidence speaks for itself, doesn't it? The stolen money, the forged documents, the preparations to disappear, those weren't the actions of someone being controlled." "Exactly, and we have Marcus's confession detailing how willing and eager she was to participate in the plan." That evening I sat in my living room, looking through photo albums that chronicled 28 years of marriage. There was Zoe on our wedding day, radiant in white, promising to love and cherish me until death do us part. There she was at Christmas mornings, birthday celebrations, anniversaries. In every photo, she looked like a loving wife. But now I understood that appearances could be deceiving. The woman in those photographs had been playing a role, just as she'd played a role during our entire marriage. The real Zoe was the one who could steal from me while making my morning coffee, who could plan my death while asking about my day. I closed the album and carried it to the fireplace. One by one, I fed the photographs to the flames, watching 28 years of false memories turn to ash. I wasn't destroying evidence of love, I was destroying evidence of the greatest deception of my life. As the last photo curled and blackened in the fire, I felt something shift inside me. The man who had walked into Bellacourt for his birthday dinner had been a victim, manipulated and betrayed by people he trusted. But the man sitting by this fireplace was something different. I was a survivor, and now I was free to discover who I really was when I wasn't defining myself as half of a marriage that had been built on lies. The revenge I was taking wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, thorough, and permanent. I was taking back my life, my future, and my right to trust again. I was reclaiming everything Zoe and Marcus had tried to steal from me, including my faith in my own judgment. Tomorrow I would begin the legal process of divorce. I would change my will, my insurance beneficiaries, and my bank account access. I would methodically erase every trace of Zoe from my financial life, just as she had tried to erase me from existence. It wasn't about hatred or anger anymore. It was about justice, served cold and complete. 6 months after the trial ended, I stood on the deck of my new home, watching the sunrise paint the lake in shades of gold and pink. The house was smaller than the one I'd shared with Zoe, but it was entirely mine, chosen by me, decorated according to my tastes alone. For the first time in decades, every decision about my living space reflected only my preferences. The trial had lasted 3 weeks and ended exactly as Amanda had predicted it would. Marcus received life in prison without the possibility of parole for multiple counts of murder in the first degree. Zoe was sentenced to 25 years for conspiracy to commit murder and attempted murder. At 68 years old, she would likely spend the rest of her life in prison. During the sentencing, she had tried one last time to reach me, calling out across the courtroom that she was sorry, that she had never stopped loving me. But by then, I understood that Zoe's definition of love was so twisted, so fundamentally selfish, that her apology meant nothing. The financial recovery had been more successful than I'd dared hope. The $73,000 she'd stolen was returned to me, along with additional funds that Marcus had already transferred to accounts in her name. The forged insurance policy was voided, but I kept the original $400,000 policy with a new beneficiary, a scholarship fund I'd established for nursing students like Sarah. Sarah, the young woman who had saved my life, had become an unlikely friend. She'd testified at the trial, her clear professional testimony helping to establish the timeline of events that night at Bellacourt. Afterward, we'd stayed in touch, and I'd learned that she was working 2 jobs while completing her nursing degree. The scholarship fund was my way of honoring her courage and helping others like her who were working hard to build better lives for themselves. It felt good to use the money Zoe had tried to steal from me for something positive, something that would help rather than harm. My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Sarah, who had finally graduated and was starting her career as a trauma nurse at the city's largest hospital. "Mr. Morrison, would you like to have lunch this weekend? I want to show you the graduation photos and tell you about my new job." I smiled, typing back my acceptance. Sarah represented something important to me, something I'd almost forgotten existed. Genuine friendship based on mutual respect and concern. She had risked her job and possibly her safety to warn me about the danger I was in, asking for nothing in return except the knowledge that she'd done the right thing. Over the past months, I'd slowly begun building new relationships, connections based on honesty rather than obligation. I'd joined a hiking group for retirees, volunteered at a local literacy center, and even started taking photography classes. Each activity brought me into contact with people who knew nothing about my past, who saw me simply as Alan, not as half of a failed marriage. The hiking group had been particularly rewarding. Every Saturday morning, 15 to 20 people gathered at various trailheads around the city, exploring paths through forests and along ridgelines that offered spectacular views of the surrounding countryside. The physical challenge felt good, but more importantly, I enjoyed the easy camaraderie of people who shared a common interest. It was during one of these hikes that I met Eleanor, a retired teacher whose husband had died 2 years earlier from cancer. We'd fallen into step together during a particularly challenging climb, and I'd found myself telling her about my love of photography. She'd mentioned her interest in wildflower identification, and we'd discovered a shared appreciation for the small details that others often overlooked. Eleanor knew about my situation in general terms, knew that I was divorced and starting over, but she didn't know the specific details. I appreciated that she didn't press for information, didn't treat me like a victim who needed to be handled carefully. To her, I was simply a man she enjoyed talking with, someone whose company made the miles pass more quickly. We'd begun hiking together outside of the group activities, exploring more remote trails where we could talk without the constant chatter of a larger group. These conversations had revealed a woman of remarkable strength and wisdom, someone who had faced her own devastating losses and emerged with her capacity for joy intact. "I learned something important when David was dying," she'd told me during one of our walks. "I learned that you can't control what happens to you, but you can control how you respond to it. You can choose to let it make you bitter, or you can choose to let it teach you something valuable about yourself." Her words had resonated with me because they reflected exactly what I'd been experiencing. The betrayal by Zoe and Marcus had been devastating, but it had also taught me things about myself that I might never have learned otherwise. I was stronger than I'd realized, more resilient, more capable of starting over than I'd ever imagined. The financial security I'd worked so hard to build had remained intact, even increased as my investments performed well in my newly simplified portfolio. Without Zoe's spending and Marcus's theft, my retirement savings had grown to just over $2,700,000. More importantly, I'd learned to value security not for what it could buy, but for the freedom it provided. I no longer worried about impressing anyone or maintaining appearances. The house by the lake was comfortable but not ostentatious. My car was reliable but not flashy. I bought what I needed and what brought me genuine pleasure. But I no longer felt the need to accumulate possessions as proof of success. The divorce had been finalized while Zoe was in prison, a process made simpler by her incarceration and the overwhelming evidence of her crimes. I'd kept the assets I'd earned during my working years, and she'd been left with nothing except the debt she'd accumulated during her spending spree with Marcus. Her family had reached out to me once, asking if I would consider helping with her legal fees. Her sister had called me, crying, explaining that Zoe was family and that families should stick together during difficult times. I'd listened politely, then explained that Zoe had forfeited any claim on my loyalty when she'd decided to murder me for money. The conversation had ended quickly. That evening, as I prepared dinner in my new kitchen, I reflected on how different my life had become. The kitchen was designed for one person, efficient and organized according to my preferences. I cooked what I wanted to eat, listened to music I enjoyed, and ate my meals on the deck while watching the lake change color as the sun set. It was a peaceful existence, but not a lonely one. In addition to Sarah and Eleanor, I'd developed friendships with several members of the hiking group, my photography instructor, and the volunteers at the literacy center. These relationships were different from the marriage I'd shared with Zoe, less intense but more genuine. I'd learned to value consistency over passion, honesty over excitement, respect over romance. The people in my life now were there because they chose to be, not because they were trapped by legal obligation or financial dependence. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was Detective Rodriguez calling with an update on Marcus's case. "Mr. Morrison, I thought you'd want to know. Marcus Delacroix was sentenced today in Louisiana for 2 additional murders we've connected to him. He received 2 more life sentences." "How many victims were there total?" 9 that we can prove, possibly as many as 12. "Your case was the key that allowed us to connect the others and build a pattern." I felt a grim satisfaction knowing that Marcus would never have the opportunity to destroy another family. "What about the other wives?" 2 more have been convicted and sentenced. 1 took a plea deal in exchange for testimony against Marcus. The others, she paused. "Well, let's just say justice isn't always perfect, but we got the main predator." After hanging up, I sat on my deck watching the last light fade from the sky. 9 families destroyed by Marcus's greed and manipulation. 9 men who'd trusted their wives only to be betrayed by the people closest to them. I was lucky to be alive. Fortunate that Sarah had overheard the right conversation at the right time. But luck was only part of it. I'd also made choices during those terrifying moments at Bellecourt. I'd chosen to trust Sarah's warning, chosen to cooperate with the police, chosen to testify against Zoe despite the pain it caused. Most importantly, I'd chosen to rebuild my life rather than retreat into bitterness and isolation. As I prepared for bed that night in my lake house, I looked at the photograph I kept on my nightstand. It wasn't a picture of Zoe or our wedding or any of the milestones of our marriage. It was a photo I'd taken during a recent hike with Eleanor, a close-up of wildflowers growing in a crack in the granite rocks along the trail. The image reminded me that beauty could flourish in the most unlikely places, that life found a way to continue even in harsh conditions. Those flowers hadn't grown despite the rocky soil. They'd grown because they'd found a way to thrive in the environment they'd been given. I was 63 years old now, with enough money to live comfortably for the rest of my life and the freedom to choose how I wanted to spend my remaining years. I had friends who valued me for who I was, not what I could provide for them. I had hobbies that brought me joy and volunteer work that gave my life meaning. Most importantly, I had learned to trust myself, Again. The man who had been fooled by Zoe and Marcus was gone, replaced by someone wiser, more cautious, but not afraid to care about people who had earned his trust. Tomorrow, Sarah would visit for lunch, bringing her graduation photos and stories about her new career. This weekend, Eleanor and I would explore a new trail she'd discovered, looking for the rare orchids that bloomed briefly in the spring. Next week, I would teach literacy classes to adults who were working to improve their lives, just as I was working to improve mine. It wasn't the life I'd planned when I was married to Zoe, but it was a better life. More honest. More authentic. It was a life built on truth rather than illusion, on genuine connection rather than legal obligation. As I turned off the lights and settled into bed, I felt something I hadn't experienced in decades. Complete peace with who I was and where I was going. The future stretched ahead of me, full of possibilities I was only beginning to explore. I was free, truly free, for the first time in my adult life, and that freedom was worth everything I'd lost along the way.